Hello, all. If you're like me, you're really fascinated with this Starlink system um, that SpaceX is setting up right now. It's going to provide worldwide coverage of the internet anywhere you go, anywhere you live, whatever you do. And from what I understand, they're saying it's going to be online or even earlier than we thought. They're saying it's going to be online in around July of this year. It's basically going to start out in just the U.S. and then eventually it's going to broaden out to the rest of the world. Not sure what the price is going to be or what the initial speeds will be. I have some articles here that we'll go over and then we'll cover that area of it. And but I live in a rural area, and thankfully I do have internet coverage where I'm at, and it's decent internet coverage. The only problem is they're not the cheapest or there is. I mean they're pretty expensive, and with this competition being prepared to start up in summer of this year, I'm hoping that it'll bring prices down or even give me another option if they can't bring the prices down. But this picture you're looking at right here is 60 of these satellites that Starlink is going to have above our orbit of here above Earth, and they're going to be in a low Earth orbit, which is going to help a lot with speeds and latency. We currently have satellites in space right now for internet, but I'm sure you all have heard of it. It's really bad with latency problems, really high latency, low speeds, not very reliable. I mean, it's just loaded with problems and it's very expensive for little bandwidth. But anyway, this stack of satellites here, 60 of them, they're being loaded on SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket to be launched February the 15th of this year. Um, I have a little something here I'll read to you. It says much of the visible advancement on the Starlink project has been satellite launches. But behind the scenes, SpaceX is developing user terminals to allow consumers to link with low latency internet network at home, in their businesses, or on the go. SpaceX has a contract with the U.S. military to use Starlink network's connectivity aboard their aircraft. Officials have not announced a price figure or projected bandwidth for consumer grade Starlink subscribers. In its early testing, the network demonstrated data speeds of 610 megabits per second last year in a signal beamed to a military plane. Okay, I'm going to say something here. And that's with just a few satellites up. That's it's going to be much better than that when they kick off this summer. I mean, there's going to be a lot more satellites up there, and as I said, more satellites, the faster the speeds. So initially 610 megabits with only maybe a few satellites up there, test satellites. That's pretty great. I mean, this thing could be really fast, and we could be talking thousands of megabits of internet speed. But anyway, SpaceX has launched 240 quarter-ton satellites on its Falcon 9 launches from Cape Canaveral, Florida, since May of 2019, half of which launched this year. 60 more will be launched February the 15th, bringing the count to 300. These will be orbiting 341 miles above the Earth. The Starlink fleet will initially number 1,584 low Earth orbiting satellites. Future goals for Starlink is to have 42,000 of these low Earth orbiting satellites above Earth. Launches for more satellites are expected approximately every 2 weeks. Yeah, this sounds pretty great to me. I mean, I'm really excited about it. Now there is some people, astronomers and all, that's concerned about this satellite array polluting the sky where they can't see, the stars and planets, whatever they're looking at out there. They say it may affect, the small satellite or telescopes, but the larger telescopes, they say that they shouldn't have any effect on those. But I have another article here. This is Jeffrey Paul. It's called "Starlink is a Big Deal." I thought it was a pretty good article with some pretty good information. But anyway, it says SpaceX has a subsidiary known as Starlink, which is presently endeavoring to blanket the majority of the inhabited latitudes of Earth with orbiting satellites to provide wireless internet access and private line communication services. This is a big deal, the consequences of which I will explain momentarily, but first some background. According to the physical rules of this universe, orbiting satellites have a velocity approximately inverse to their altitude to maintain same. This is to say, the higher a satellite's orbit, the slower it can maintain its orbit, and vice versa. Most communication satellites today are what are known as geosynchronous or geostationary, which is to say that they orbit the same axis around which the Earth rotates daily, and they are situated at an altitude that permits their orbital period to be equal to the time it takes for Earth to perform a full rotation, as it does each 86,164 seconds. This has the neat side effect of the satellite appearing perfectly motionless, simply hanging at a single point in the sky when viewed from the surface of the Earth, which is quite convenient for aiming antennas at them. This is how it's been done forever, since the esteemed Clark first suggested it in 1945, before we even put up any satellites at all. Starlink satellites are the solution at only 550 kilometers altitude, which is 341 miles. Going much faster due to the lower orbit, they're not going to stay put, viewed from the ground. You're not going to be aiming a dish at them. There are also going to be a lot of them, which is why this project wasn't feasible until the previous milestone of cheap access to orbit was checked off. Thanks to the hard work of SpaceX to make cheap, reusable rockets an everyday reality, now a project of this scale and ambition is finally realistic. Having started with a launch of 60 satellites on 24th of May of last year, they're outlining a $10 billion US project comprising of approximately 1,600 satellites for the first phase. Their announced plans speak eventually of 12,000 or even over 40,000 within 5 to 10 years. As of the time of this article, there was 242, which, as I said, should bring it up to around 300 February the 15th of this year. Consequences. Connectivity will be the great equalizer in the future. With high quality, uncensored, reliable access to the global network, intelligent and resourceful people located virtually anywhere can operate on substantially similar footing to anyone else so equipped. Billions of people blocked from accessing the internet due to lack of infrastructure or local greed or fraud related to same are presently kept from participating in the global knowledge economy. Starlink will remedy this, to some extent. Save for the wide deployment of the internet itself, Starlink and its spiritual siblings, launched by others, may be one of the crowning technological achievements of our generation. Of course, it wouldn't be possible at all without cheap access to orbit, the praise for which can really go to none other than SpaceX in the first place. Their long-term visions have certainly illustrated to me the intense power of a cohesive and simple narrative in motivating large groups to collective action. A business, their own large corporate infrastructure, staff, and research and development need a steady stream of cash to continue to prosecute their vision. What an irony that once their initial milestone of cheap access to orbit is attained, their very first low-hanging fruit, easy money project amongst a huge list of potential profit centers enabled by cheap orbital access happens to be the one that will, in addition to generating monumental amounts of cash flow via, okay, I'm going to skip this part, will also happen to connect approximately half of the living humans to each other at, compared to existing terrestrial options, ludicrously extreme high speed. Preliminary tests with fewer than 100 satellites up showed approximately 600 megabits per second available as tested on an aircraft in flight to Starlink. For reference, my last flat in Berlin on the ground on the main street in the city center was serviced with approximately 14 megabits of DSL, and this was the fastest offering available from any vendor. This is not just a game changer for people like you and I, living in relatively populated places struggling against greedy last mile monopolists. Remember that half the human beings are not yet online. The most meaningful impact to humanity will be that SpaceX generates revenue and doesn't go out of business, and continues to exist as a concern so that they can pursue technology to establish a permanent settlement on Mars, so that future pandemics, wars, changes in climate, or stray asteroids affecting Earth do not permanently end the human story before it really got started properly. The biggest impact to our present lifetimes will be bringing those online who presently have zero connectivity. Whatever 4 billion people can do, presumably 8 billion people can do at least twice as well, but hopefully better, as the network effects of anyone being able to call or write or read anyone else should absolutely be superlinear. The biggest likely circumstantial impact to you and I, places previously unusable or unsuitable for long-term habitation or business development by business people due to poor connectivity, will be suddenly rendered green on the map. Presently, to run a successful business, a minimum of 20 plus megabits per second, low latency, reliable connectivity is required for such thing as client calls, team collaboration, video training, software downloads, real-time chat, etc. In addition to the usual standards for a life relatively free of strife, electricity, clean water, reliable food, access to medicine, and a reasonable lack of sustained violence. This limits one to cities or remote places where terrestrial wireless capabilities can deliver best-in-class services, which is another way of saying this limits one to cities. Starlink means that you can go live in the woods of Siberia if you like, with relatively little impact to your team. The only barrier remaining is time zones, travel distances, another side project that SpaceX is actively pursuing. Cruise ships, undeveloped countries, remote forests, desert wandering all become practically viable when you can receive 100 plus megabits per second anywhere outside the Arctic Circle. You can see the sky. Hundreds of cities and dozens of countries, fine for living but previously entirely unsuitable for a place of business, will blink from red to green on the map once Starlink goes live. This is, of course, a selfish tangent for rich business people, but a non-significant one nonetheless, or non-insignificant one nonetheless. Truly, I am most happy and excited to see the collective works of half of humanity that is presently rendered entirely mute in the global consciousness, With any luck, not too many of those people so connected will be murdered by their local governments for piercing the historic local control on information dissemination by daring to speak to the stars. Okay, that's about all I have on that at the moment. Later on, I'm going to be, uh, once I get some more information on Amazon's basic, satellite network that they're going to be doing. I mean, they plan to put a high-speed internet service just like Starlink, low Earth orbiting satellites up, and they're going. It'll probably be later in the year or the first of next year, sometime before there's too much talk on that, too much information. But I do know they have this in plan, and there's some other internet possibilities that's going to be coming up soon. I mean, there's a lot of going on to try to provide internet connectivity in this country and across the world, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm not too happy with the thought of a sky polluted with satellites, and but we do need, in this day and age, internet coverage everywhere, and I mean, this is the best way to get it that I could think of. But I hope you enjoyed the article and the information. I hope it was helped you out a lot there, especially if you're like me. I'm really fascinated with this thing, and I just can't get enough. So, but anyways, if you can check out my other videos, I'm relatively new at this. I have 10 or 11 videos on here, and they're growing, every day or so. And I'm not real great with it. I have to get better equipment, and I have to sharpen up, my video capabilities there. But I hope you enjoyed the article, and come back to see me when you can. And if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up. I'd sure appreciate it. Share, subscribe. That would be really nice, and even leave a comment if you have time. But thanks again for stopping by, and you all have a great night. Bye-bye.